Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Burnout to Balance Practical Tips for Educators session. I'm super excited you are here. I wanted to let you see my face, but I don't want to have my face mess up any of the content I want to show you on the screen. So I want to share my slides and we're going to get this started. Welcome to the presentation from Burnout to Balanced Practical Tips for Educators. So my name is Kasey Bell. If we haven't met yet, I'm a coach, teacher, speaker, author, podcaster, all in the name of helping teachers learn how to use technology in the classroom. And you will mostly find me over at shakeuplearning.com. That is where I have been for the last decade. I also have some newer projects that I've been working on, Teacher Revival for Christian teachers and burnouttobless.net, which is for Christian women. And you will also learn a little bit more about my speaking and the types of speaking that I do at kaseybell.com. And of course, you can find me across social media as well. The links to my slides will also be available below the video if you're watching on YouTube, or if you're listening to the podcast version of this, it will also be in the podcast description. Now, let's get started. Let's talk about what this means, because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart for so many reasons. I have faced burnout myself quite frequently, but really hit a severe burnout in 2021. Like so many other educators, the pandemic kind of did us in, and I think everything that came after that just seemed to be icing on the cake. And it's not just happening to teachers. It's pretty much become an epidemic of really massive proportions. We've seen the Great Resignation happening in education. We're also seeing this happen to a lot of other professions as well. So it was really important for me to kind of shift gears and do something that I felt was important and address it in a way that I don't see a lot of other people doing. So that's what brings me here today. What we're going to talk about is what exactly is burnout. We're going to talk about the early signs. We're also going to talk about something called the stress cycle and how to complete it and why that is so important. I'm going to share with you my thoughts on self-care versus soul care. We're going to talk about how to set boundaries, how to prioritize your tasks, and I'm going to give you a couple of my favorite techniques for time blocking and how to use the Pomodoro technique, as well as a few resources. So we're gonna hit a lot of different things. We're going to talk about some practical things. We're going to talk about some deep things. And of course, I've got some tech tips for you at the end of this. So are you so burnt out and overwhelmed that you've forgotten what it's like to enjoy your work? So depending on when you're listening to this, because it is part of our summer learning series, you may be getting back to yourself as you are resting and recovering in the summer. But I want you to go back to how you felt at the end of school and ask yourself this question. Did you really enjoy it at the way you used to even? And if you're new and you've never enjoyed it, I apologize, because this is not the education that we have known and loved for so many years. I've heard from so many teachers that teaching in the last 4 years has changed. It's a different job. So as we look forward and as we try to determine what we're going to do about our burnout and our overwhelm and our stress, I want you to think about this. I have been there and I have said these words, I can't do this anymore. And if you're listening on the podcast right now, on the screen is a picture that I took. I'm pretty sure this one was taken in 2021. It was a reaction to something crazy that was going on on social media at the time, but it was also a reflection of just what was going on that time. I don't take a lot of selfies, so I didn't have a lot of pictures that really showed how I felt. And if you've ever just hung your head down and felt like you can't do this anymore, this is for you. Now, I want you to know some statistics. There is a lot of research coming out about burnout. And I'm going to refer back to a book that I read called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And the first stat that I have to share with you is from that book. And it says burnout is highly prevalent. 20 to 30% of teachers in America have moderately high to high levels of burnout. You're also going to find there are similar rates among professors and humanitarian aid workers. Medical profession can be as high as 52%. So there's just a lot in the professions that care. That's what you'll find. And you'll hear them talk about this in this book. So what I want to talk about was the fact that that quote was from 5 years ago. So where are we now? Because that was pre-pandemic. So when I started digging and trying to find some more relevant and recent statistics, I found this one. And this is from 2024. It says nearly 70% of the 6,000 Texas educators surveyed by the Texas American Federation of Teachers Union say they are ready to quit their jobs. They're so fed up. And I know this is just Texas, but this was one of the most recent pieces of data that I could find to share with you. And of course, Texas is where I live. It is near and dear to my heart, but 70%? That is astounding. So what in the world are we going to do? How do we help this situation? Well, let's talk about what is burnout. How do we end up where we are in a state of burnout? And I have a graphic on the screen. It's a Venn diagram, three circles in this Venn diagram. And this one comes from that book that I'm referring to, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And we have in our first circle emotional exhaustion, and that is fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. And guess who does that a lot? Teachers, right? Teachers do that a lot. The other circle, you'll see depersonalization. That is the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. And then in our third circle, we have decreased sense of accomplishment. And that is feeling like nothing you do makes a difference. So the combination of these three things, and by the way, this was not something that just came from this book. This was historically how burnout has been defined for quite some time. And we have the combination of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a decreased sense of accomplishment. That is what we are defining as burnout. So you may have pieces of this. You may have some early signs, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, or you may be fully in the middle of this. So stay with me here. Early signs of burnout: exhaustion, feeling persistently tired even after rest. I have definitely felt that one. Lack of motivation, loss of enthusiasm for work, even tasks that were once enjoyable. Cynicism and frustration, increasingly negative or critical feelings towards the job. Cognitive difficulties, and I think this is one that we often don't necessarily associate it with burnout because it's a physical symptom. But if you're having trouble concentrating, remembering, or making decisions, this could also be linked to the stress that you are under. Emotional changes, feeling overwhelmed, irritable, or detached from work and your colleagues. And then, of course, these physical symptoms like experiencing headaches, muscle pain, or changes in your sleep or appetite. Those are all early signs. And of course, they are signs that can be persistent for a long time. But if these are new signs that have popped up for you, you are showing some early signs of burnout. Now, this quote from the book that I keep referring to, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle, is the number one quote you will find in this book. If you Google this book, if you look at anything, and this is what it says: The stress itself will kill you faster than the stressor will, unless you do something to complete the stress response cycle. So let that sink in for a moment. Stress cannot be undervalued here, because putting that kind of strain on your body can have true physical consequences. So I want you to think about that as you think about how stressed you are. This is really important. So they talk about the stress cycle in this book, and there are 6 steps to this stress cycle. If you're following along on the video on YouTube, I have a graphic from the Musing Mind to walk you through this. But here's what happens. Number 1, the stressor appears. This is the stressful event that occurs, a message, a conversation, a misbehavior in your classroom, a student situation, a parent situation. The stressor has appeared, okay? Then we move into number 2. This is when our stress response system is activated. This is truly how your body responds to stress. And it's also called the fight, flight, or freeze state. This is when our brains are acting like we are in danger, even though we may not actually be in physical life is at stake kind of danger. Our body still reacts the same way, and our bodies become full of stress. Number 3, that's when the stressor has been handled. It disappears. The stressful event is over. Okay, it has passed. And then the really important part to this cycle, number 4. This is when the stress response system is deactivated. We do something that enables the body to process the stress, like using or tensing muscles, followed by stretching, deep breathing, yoga, quality social interactions, or getting a good night's sleep. So those things that we typically would call self-care would probably fall into this category. We need to deactivate what's happening in our bodies. And that would take us to step 5 and 6. And step 5 is when our bodies go into rest and recovery mode. And that is your body's cue to process that stress, because we need to reduce the stress levels in our bodies and repair the damage that has been done inside our bodies that's caused by stress. And then number 6 is we have completed the stress cycle. Our bodies are able to recover and less susceptible to chronic stress-induced problems like burnout. Okay, so once we complete this cycle, our bodies have reset and we can handle what comes next, right? It's when we get in the habit of staying in that stress response and never completing the stress cycle, number 4, that is so important. That's when we end up in constant burnout, because we can't process that stress anymore. That constant stress is, again, what will kill you faster than the stressor itself. The stressful event is not the thing that is truly detrimental to our health. It is our body's reaction to the stress that has been caused. So 7 ways to complete the stress cycle. How do we get to number 4? And these will sound familiar, but I bet you haven't purposely thought of these in the moment when the stressor has passed. So think about these. Number 1, move. Of course, we always hear that, exercise and being active can help reduce stress. Sometimes it's go take a walk, step outside, walk around the building, and, just kind of reset yourself. Number 2, breathe. And breathing exercises I know can be extremely useful. It lowers your heart rate, it helps your body to relax, and can be extremely beneficial just to take the time to take some deep breaths. Number 3, talk to people, get it out, or, change the subject, get your mind thinking about something else, connect with people. Number 4, laugh. And this might be my favorite one and probably the one that I reach for a lot. Just to talk to someone who makes you laugh, talk to your funny friend, or escape to a funny video or something funny your students or your own children have done, something just to make you laugh. And for me, I know this was something I found myself doing a lot during the pandemic, especially during lockdown. It was an escape, but it was also helping to reduce that stress of what's happening to the world right now. And, just watching a funny video it can do wonders for that moment, just to help you chill out a little bit. Number 5, love. Connect to the people who mean the most to you. And, doing that in whatever way is the thing that you need, talking to your spouse, talking to your best friend, talking to anyone that you care about, and making those connections can help you complete this stress cycle. Number 6, cry. Oh my goodness. How good is it to have a good cry? There is something so releasing about crying. And of course, there's hormones and things that are involved, but sometimes that's what you need to do, depending on how stressful the situation is. And I remember even as a child, it was a joke, a family joke, when I was little, and I would get upset about something, and my mom would ask me, why am I crying? I'm like, I gotta get it out. Like it's just started. Like the tears are falling, and I needed that release. And if you listen to this podcast for very long, you've probably heard me tear up a little bit. I try to keep it in control, but y'all, sometimes stressful moments need a few tears just to give your body that release. And number 7, do something creative. I love creative escapes. I love being able to, sit down and do something with my hands, or to think about something critically, to even write, to journal, to do those types of things, sketchnoting, doodling, anything creative can help you do this. Okay, now I'm going to give you my quote, but this is really more of a soapbox moment here. No amount of burnout prevention techniques, self-care, good boundaries, time management skills, or finding your why can replace the need for good leadership. And I'll say this very carefully because I know so many of you may be in burnout, and those stressful situations may need a leader who's just not stepping up. And unfortunately, I'm hearing that from so many people. And I'm definitely not pointing fingers, because I know we have many amazing leaders out there doing everything they can for their teachers. But I also know that school leaders must help lighten the load. Job creep, which is just that incremental increase of the tasks and the stressors and the weights that are put on your job each year, that just grow and grow and grow. That's called job creep. And combine that with a lack of leadership and a lack of student discipline, that's what's destroying the teacher profession right now. And I've conducted my own research and surveys, like, what is your biggest burnout right now? And for many, I heard student behavior, because student behavior is out of control. We've never seen students behaving like this. I've also seen lack of administrator support, whether it's the support on the student discipline side, or, the leaders who will stand up for you and say, no, my teachers can't do anymore. We've got to find another solution. So we need good leaders to keep our classroom teachers from entering burnout. Does that mean we need to do PD on burnout? Maybe. But I will tell you, this was actually pre-pandemic. I was forced to go to professional development for my job that required me learning how to meditate and how to breathe. While those are things that I may have pursued on my own, I also felt like it kind of encroached on my own personal beliefs as well as my own choice in the matter. So it's a very personal thing when you talk about how to handle stress and burnout. And I think talking about these things and giving options is great. Forcing it on someone and saying that we're going to spend 4 hours learning how to do this and you've got to sit still and close your eyes and do this in a group in front of people can also seem like you're overstepping your bounds. So I just want to put that out there because that was something I experienced, and I just hope that leaders listening, even though it works for you, just keep in mind what works for you does not work for everyone else. Okay, let's talk about how we're going to set some boundaries to prevent some of the things that stress us out and lead to burnout. First of all, boundary number 1, avoid toxic negativity. And I'm going to give a shout out to Amber Harper from the Burned In Teacher. We talked about this on a previous podcast episode, and I completely agree with this. The conversations that we have can contribute to our own feelings of stress and burnout. Remove yourself from toxic conversations. And I say this for both in-person conversations and online. So if you have found yourself in this situation where you and another teacher or another group of teachers are constantly like complaining and pointing out all the things that you hate about your job, I've been there too. That doesn't help. Just the toxic negativity can really, really make things worse. Because negativity is contagious. And that doesn't mean that we're ignoring it. It just means sometimes we got to say, you know what? I need to walk away if this is where the conversation is going because I just can't take any more negativity right now. Boundary number 2 is say no. Or I should say, don't be afraid to say no. Stop saying yes to everything. Teachers have really just been so much of the helper that we don't always know where our boundaries lie. So know your capacity and be honest when someone asks you to do something. You know, when I started my very first year of teaching, they piled everything on me. I had too many preps. I had extracurriculars, I had lunch duty, I had all the things. And when I talked to the more seasoned teachers, they're like, wow, they saw you coming. Like you got everything. And I didn't even know it was an option to say no. I just thought I had to do it. So, of course, as you grow and you learn how this job works, you can say no because saying yes means you're saying no to something else. You only have so much time. So I want you to consider, even if you're always that person that still says yes and you enjoy what you do, taking on that extra project means maybe you've got to work later. Maybe you've got to work on the weekends. Maybe you've got to answer some emails during off-hour times. And who are you saying no to in the process? For me, if I take on too much, that means I've got to say no to my son. If I need to work on the weekend, and that means I'm giving up time with him. So I have to weigh things out in who I'm willing to say yes to. Boundary number 3, take a digital detox. Y'all, devices have brought a lot of conveniences to our lives. But let's not negate the research that is coming out right now about how addictive our devices are. And I will be the first to tell you, I have my phone with me almost everywhere I go, and my 3-year-old notices that. He notices when I'm on my phone. He notices what I'm doing, and I'm modeling that behavior. So what do I have to think about? What things am I doing on my device, and how can I go on a digital detox? How can I let go of some of this behavior? Give yourself some boundaries for screen time, especially what they call doom scrolling. So, I have set some screen time limits for certain apps on my phone that I find myself losing track of time. Sometimes it starts out as something truly part of my job, something I need to do, but then here comes a notification, here comes something else. And before you know it, you've spent 30 minutes or an hour doing something that should have just taken a couple of minutes. The other thing with doom scrolling kind of goes back to what I was saying for me personally during the pandemic, was when I really found this to be a pattern of my own behavior. I was escaping. I was bored. I didn't know what to do. And now that I'm not really bored anymore, it's become a pattern. And they have devised these algorithms to be extremely addictive. It is not just addictive for the teenagers that we see the problems with in our classrooms, but it can be also addictive for adults. So I just want you to take that into consideration and think about who is in your feed, because some of the content coming your way may also be feeding that negative thought or the stress in your life. So if you're constantly learning about how many teachers hate their jobs right now, maybe you need to unfollow some people. Maybe you need to spend some time off of social media, whatever it is. I feel like this is different for everyone. Again, that you want to personalize this, and maybe your device is not a problem for you, but I can tell you I am already considering how I can maybe go analog for a little while and see what happens. And there is a movement out there, even with people just going to flip phones because of how toxic the content has become. So just consider this. If your screen time is contributing to your stress or your burnout. Boundary number 4, communicate and be consistent. So if you don't want to answer email after work hours, communicate it. Don't make the assumption. I know you're like, I shouldn't have to tell people I'm not going to work after contract hours. I just feel like we should all be professionals and accept the fact that other people may answer email. And so we just want to be clear that this is how we're going to operate and communicate. So if you're, whether it's parents, whether it's your administrators, whoever it is, just politely say, I check email between these hours and I will get back to you by this amount of time. I tend to discourage the automatic email that tells people that every time. I've had that happen. And while it's okay the first time, but when you just keep getting those autoresponders, it really makes you feel like you're not important anymore. And we don't want to go the other way. We just want to communicate and be consistent. So the next piece of this is seeking support. So if you found yourself identifying with a lot of those burnout symptoms, I want you to consider how you can seek support for emotional relief, which could be talking to someone to help alleviate stress and provide a sense of relief. Maybe it's just a stress response completion that you're seeking and you need to talk to a friend or a leader or a pastor or a confidant, whoever it is. Maybe you also need to speak to someone else. Maybe you need to escalate this a little bit if your burnout is severe and talk to a therapist or a counselor. These people can offer a fresh perspective. Sometimes it's your friend who can see things in a different way, especially if it's a friend who is outside of your work environment, but also those third-party counselors and therapists can offer new insights and solutions to your problems. Professional guidance can offer effective strategies and coping mechanisms that would be tailored to you. So if you went to seek help, instead of being told at a training that everybody needs to learn this breathing technique, maybe you can learn a technique that is appropriate for you and your beliefs and your personality. improved well-being, you want to receive that support that can enhance your overall well-being and happiness. And of course, we want to prevent escalation. So if you've hit early signs, and maybe it's the first time you've really felt like maybe you were heading into burnout, we want to prevent that from going any further. And especially if you're listening to this in the summer, you're like, I'll be fine when school starts. Well, hang on. You want to look out for those signs when school starts up again. You don't want to let that get any worse if you see those signs popping up. So early intervention can prevent burnout from worsening into more serious issues like depression, anxiety. The list can go on and on. Obviously, you can have true physical problems that can arise too. And I've seen that happen with teachers. I've seen that happen with a lot of people when you're in constant stress. So we definitely want to do everything we can and seek the support when we need it. Self-care is great. Don't get me wrong. I feel like self-care has become this, it has become this brand new industry, especially since the pandemic. But I feel like it's being sold as the Band-Aid solution to everything. And while I am a great believer in taking care of yourself, I am also not a fan of self coming before everything else. It just goes against my beliefs. So I believe that soul care is better than self-care. And stay with me here because I just want to introduce you to a more holistic approach, as opposed to just taking walks and bubble baths and massages and exercising. So what is this idea of soul care? Well, soul care offers a more holistic approach to well-being compared to just traditional self-care. Self-care often focuses on external comforts, short-term relief. Soul care encourages deeper introspection and addresses your core spiritual and emotional needs. So I want you to think self-care short-term, soul care long-term. By nurturing our inner lives through practices like prayer, reflective journaling, and connecting with our own religious beliefs, soul care fosters lasting peace, balance, and fulfillment. It encourages us to look beyond temporary fixes and invest in practices that align with our deepest values and faith, enhancing our overall well-being. So, as we move into some other practical tips, I want to talk about how we can prioritize our tasks for maximum impact. And this is something I am constantly doing. Y'all, my to-do list never gets shorter. I am never at inbox zero. Bless you if you can do that, but I just don't have that kind of time anymore. So I really have to prioritize what is important and what is going to give me the maximum impact. And the priority matrix, or the Eisenhower matrix, is something I have used since I graduated college. I learned this technique in a training in my first job out of college, which was a corporate position, and we had what they called Franklin Covey training based on many different techniques, including this one and Stephen Covey's techniques. And of course, they were selling us the planner and everything. Y'all still love these planners, but that's not what I'm talking to you about today. I just find looking at this matrix really helps you figure out what's important and what to do first. When you have a long list of things and you don't know what to do, this will get you there. So first, I want you to look at the left-hand side. And if you're listening to the podcast, this is just essentially a graph with 4 squares. Okay, we've got 4 quadrants. And in the top left quadrant is your important and urgent tasks. These are the things that you do first. If it falls into the quadrant as important and urgent, that's got to be done now, okay? And then in the top right, they're important, but they're not urgent. Those are the things you need to schedule, write down, put into your little to-do list manager, give yourself a due date because eventually it's going to become urgent, right? So the do first and then schedule. And then down in the bottom 2 quadrants, we have not important. So we have not important and urgent. Those are the things you need to delegate. And hang with me, I'm gonna talk about delegation in just a second. Those are the things that you need to delegate if you can. And then in the last quadrant, if it's not urgent and it's not important, delete it, right? If it's not important, why is it on your list? Sometimes we're like, I thought that was going to be important, but it's not anymore. I deleted some things off of my to-do list this morning. So we just have to think through this. So looking at this quadrant, and again, if you're listening to the podcast and you want to jump over to YouTube and see this visual and watch it, you can also see it in the blog post that is linked below this podcast episode. But you'll be able to really prioritize what order to do your tasks. So let's go back to that delegate quadrant. Not important, but it's urgent. And those things just come up. The things you gotta handle, right? Especially in a classroom, probably a lot of things with our students. And I want you to think about who can help, because you probably don't have a secretary or an assistant, but you might be able to use AI to do it. You might be able to use AI to draft an email or to answer a question or, to create something very quickly for you. Students, can student helpers do this? Can student helpers, organize some papers for you? Can they grade some papers for you? Sometimes, depending on what grade you teach. I definitely used to do that in middle school. Student teachers and interns, if you have these in your world, please use them. Student teachers and interns can definitely learn a lot from these types of tasks. Staff, do you have access to use staff for these types of things? I think it's kind of hard sometimes to realize what maybe is not important, but it's still urgent. And, there are just sometimes those mundane tasks that have to be done by a certain time. And we want to use every bit of help that we can get. Or can you outsource it? Is it worth your money to pay someone to do that? What is your time worth? Sometimes I'm looking at things that are urgent, like I really need to buy some groceries. That is an urgent need. Is it important? Well, I guess it is important, but maybe not as important as many other things. And I'm willing to tip somebody to save me the time so that I can work on something that is worth more of my time. Now, when you're prioritizing your to-do list, right, we've got these 4 quadrants. And if you can work everything into those 4 quadrants of the priority matrix, you've gotten started already. Now, this is a screenshot, and I apologize because it is kind of pixelated. This was the one that I could find of the original Franklin Covey planner that I was mentioning. And I share this with you so you can see the prioritized daily task list. This is where you brain dump all your tasks, everything you put in here, what you've got to do. And then there are 2 columns next on the left-hand side of the task. In the very first column, which is a really small column, we're going to come back to that one. Skip over, and now we are in a tiny little column right next to your task. This is where you go and you put an A next to everything that fell into your do first quadrant. Your urgent and important gets an A next to it. Okay, everything that's in schedule gets a B. Everything that's in delegate gets a C. And everything that fell into D needs to be deleted, so forget about that. So you've got A, B, C. Then you go through all of your A's, and you put them in the order of what needs to be done first. A1 is the first thing you're going to do. A2 is the next thing you're going to do. A3 is the next thing you're going to do, and so on. And then you go through your B's and your C's. If you're like me, I'm always staying. I've got so many A's to get done, but that's where we start. That other column that I mentioned, which is the very first one, is where you mark the status. And Franklin Covey planners have this little key. And if you're interested in learning more, you can look this up. But like a dot means it's in progress. Maybe I didn't complete it that day. If I have decided to forward it to the next day, then I draw an arrow to the right and so on. So it's just kind of a little status piece that you could use or not use. But this for me, even though y'all, I have read so many productivity books, I geek out on all these different to-do list managers and things like this. I always come back to this. I still use it. 20 years later, it has come back. Okay, let's talk about another technique that I have started using over the last few years, and it is called time blocking. So what is time blocking? It is a method of managing time by dividing the day into specific blocks dedicated to particular tasks or activities. So scheduling in advance. This means you plan your day by allocating specific time slots for different tasks and appointments. Now stay with me. If you're a classroom teacher, I know your classroom time is already blocked out. But think about your personal time, think about your weekend time, and how you can do this. Because when we stay focused on one task and related tasks, it is much more productive than constantly going back and forth. So for instance, today is my recording day. I'm taking care of all of the recording that I need to do. And I have a block of time that I set aside just for that. Prioritizing your tasks and using the time blocking method helps in organizing those tasks by importance and urgency so that you can ensure that each task gets dedicated attention. So when you block out your day, you can, put all of these, I'm going to work, for 1 hour on this task, and it helps you to organize it into blocks. And it aids in efficiency and completion by managing your time effectively to ensure all planned tasks are completed within set times. So you want to try time blocking if you juggle many different projects and responsibilities, you spend too much time in reactive mode responding to emails and messages, find your day chopped up by meetings. So if you're listening to this and you're an educator who spends a lot of time in meetings, this can be really difficult to actually get work done in between. You need that focus time. Battle constant interruptions throughout the day, or if you struggle to find the time and mental space for big picture thinking, time blocking can really help. And I do have an image from Todoist of what this looks like. And really they're just showing like a day calendar, in a digital format where you've got little blocks of appointments and they're color coded to show what most people do, which is, okay, from 8 to 8:30, I'm going to do this. From 9 to 9:30, I'm going to do this. And it's broken into tiny little segments. But time blocking breaks it into bigger segments. So you're working on things in more of a batch fashion as opposed to constantly task switching. So how does this work if you're a classroom teacher? Well, first of all, time block your planning period before and after school time slots. So, thinking of how you're going to use that class period as opposed to trying to do everything can be really helpful. Time block your personal to-do list or try theme days. And that's really what I was explaining that I have been trying more recently to do theme days, to work on certain things on certain days. So maybe Mondays are administrative tasks. So on your planning period, if it's not already taken up by something else, okay, so on Mondays, I'm going to work on grading, reports, and completing forms. On Tuesdays, I'm going to work on lesson planning. On Wednesdays, I'm going to run errands and do grocery shopping. If that can happen during your planning period or if that can happen after school, whatever it is. Thursdays, cleaning and organizing. Fridays, creating, whatever it is. It really helps you stay focused when you can think of things more in a theme and to time block for that theme. All right, last but not least is the Pomodoro technique. And I have shared this before on the blog. This is another thing I've learned over the last decade that is extremely helpful when I remember to use it. I don't always remember to start my timer. So let me explain what a Pomodoro is. So the Pomodoro technique is a time management method where you work for a focused 25-minute interval called a Pomodoro, followed by a short break, typically 5 minutes, to enhance productivity and maintain mental sharpness. This is great for deep work. If you've got to do a lot of critical thinking, you've got to write something, you've got to create something, this is really helpful. I promise you, it is not stifling. So when I saw this, I'm like, I'm going to lose my train of thought. I'm not going to remember when I come back 5 minutes later what I was doing. And that is absolutely not true. The brain break is extremely useful. So this is also great for students who are doing deep work. If students are working on some projects that require a lot of critical thinking, this can be really useful for them too. Sometimes they're like, just kind of, you catch them stopping because their brains are fried. They need a break. And this can really kind of help reduce that wall that you hit. So I do have a graphic here on how to do your first Pomodoro, and it is broken into 8 steps. And the Pomodoro, the reason it's called that is referring back to that little kitchen timer, the little tomato timer. Number 1 on your steps is to get into an optimal workspace without distractions. I know if you're a classroom teacher, that may not be possible during class time, but Pomodoro techniques can be very useful outside of that. Number 2, choose one task to focus on. Number 3, set your timer for 25 minutes, and this can vary. It doesn't have to be 25. That's kind of the tradition. Number 4, do the work. Number 5, you stop when the timer ends. And number 6, you take a 5-minute break. And then you just repeat it. And usually after you have done 3 Pomodoros, you take a longer break, like a 30-minute break. So if you're at home working during the summer, this is a great time to try this while you're working on some things. Maybe you're working on something a little more deep or lesson planning or something like that at home, and set your timer. 5 minutes goes off, go check the laundry, go do some dishes, whatever, for 5 minutes, and then come back. It really is, it doesn't sound like you would be as productive, but it's kind of amazing how productive you can be. All right, I want to leave you with some teacher time savers. So I have created so many other videos over the years that are just those quick tips, those time-saving technology tips that have helped teachers save time. And if you're saving time, hopefully you're reducing stress and your burnout. So I will be linking to this below, the video as well as the podcast, your Google Quick Tip video library. And y'all, it is, I don't know how many videos are there, well over 100 videos available now. Most of the tips are really short, like 2 to 5 minutes. There's a couple of longer ones in there that really are kind of summative of several tips, but lots of things if you just want some quick tips to learn how to save some time, learn some keyboard shortcuts, learn some kind of feature that can really help you. And I also keep this in a Google Doc where you can see it broken down by Google Apps and see which kind of tips you want to go learn. So, what strategies will you try? I hope you have enjoyed this presentation. This is a little bit different than what I usually present, but I really want to help those of you who have faced your own burnout. I want to give you some strategies, both practical strategies, emotional strategies. I hope that this has resonated with you, and I hope you will try some strategies soon. I have additional resources that will be linked below the YouTube video as well as the podcast. And I have a brand new program that I am launching for Christian women, and it is called the Soul Care Society. And you can learn more about that by going to burnouttoblessed.net/soulcare. And I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you, and I hope you have a great summer.